It's Dave from ThinkOutsideTheSlide.com. Recently, I presented a session at the Excel Virtually Global Conference on my 5 favorite Excel chart hacks. In this video, I want to share with you hack number 4, adding a custom line by using a scatter plot. I'll link to the playlist with all 5 hacks in the top right corner. I want to start by sharing with you the hack as I presented it during the conference session. Then I'll come back and share some additional tips, ideas, or resources to help you apply this idea to your Excel charts. Let's start with the video from the conference session.
The next hack I want to share is how you can add a custom line. Now, why wouldn't you just draw a line using the Insert a Line tool within Excel? Well, this technique, this hack is going to allow you to create that line based on data. This allows you to have calculated lines. It allows you to position them exactly where you want to based on the data. And this gives you the advantage of when it needs to be updated, you don't have to remember, oh, manually, I've got to go and move that line to that. No, you don't need to do that. And it has all the characteristics of lines. So you can make it thickness, you can decide whether it's dashed or not, you can add an arrow on the end. All of these features come with this hack. And how are we going to do this? Well, what we're going to do is we're going to use a scatter plot. A scatter plot has an option where it's a scatter plot with lines that doesn't have markers. So essentially it creates lines wherever you tell Excel the data in that chart series, wherever you tell Excel that line should be. This is what gives you that flexibility. It gives you the ability to create customized line callouts on your charts that are driven by the data. Again, being driven by the data makes it easy to update in the future because, well, you don't have to do anything to update it. The data will force the chart to draw the line in the correct spot. So let's go over to Excel. I'm going to show you how we create this customized line using this type of a scatter plot. Okay, we're back in Excel, and the example I want to show you is something that's very, very common, and it is to add a line to indicate the compound annual growth rate, or CAGR is the short form for that, to a column chart of values. So our data came in here, and we have year 1 through 4. We have the units sold here in our data table that came in from somewhere else. And the first thing we need to do, and especially this is important when you're calculating the line based on the data, is to have helper cells. So helper cells is usually a section I set up here to the right of the data that came in from my analysis. And my helper cells here are going to be sort of those in-between calculations so that I don't have to make the formulas in the chart data table so incredibly complex. And the first thing I'm going to do here is to create the compound annual growth rate and get it as a number. And the formula I'm using here, let me go up to the formula bar here, is the RRI formula. It's the internal rate of return, one of the variations on it in Excel. And what it does is it tells me it's 0.05563, so 5.6% when you round it. Now, what I always like to do when I'm doing these return calculations is to test it. So I'll take my first value here, 2563, and then I will use this compound annual growth rate to calculate what the values would be if the growth was the exact same every single year. Because that's what CAGR is. CAGR says, hey, you know what? Take the growth between the first point and the last point values, and what if it was the same every year? Now, it's not going to be the same every year, of course, but what if it was? What would that rate be? So what I do is I use that rate that's been calculated and then test it. This makes sure that the formula that I'm relying on isn't incorrect in some way. I didn't put a parameter in incorrectly, or I didn't select the right function, something like that. So that's the first set of helper cells, is to actually create what that CAGR number is. Now the next set of helper cells here is about our line. So our line, what I want it to be is I want it to be positioned above the columns, a consistent amount above the value of the columns. That allows me to have space above the columns for the data labels, and it allows that line to look like it's supposed to look. And so what I'm doing here is I'm making a decision here. This is an input that you can do, is I said, okay, the line distance in percentage, so I want it to be 15% above the line, above that line that's going to be the largest. So my distance that I'm going to add, as I said, find the maximum of B7 to B10, so find the maximum of the units values, multiply that by my percentage. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to position this line, that distance, 452.25, above every value, because that allows me to now make sure that I have that line consistent. Now, when I say every value, it's really the first and last value, because that's really where the line's being drawn. The intermediate values aren't what's important. It's that first and last. I want it positioned properly there. So I've done my helper calculations, those intermediate calculations. Now I can set up my chart data. So my chart data is down here, and again, I have the units. That's pretty standard. I have my force 0 here because, again, especially when you're talking about CAGR, when you're talking about any sort of growth rate, you have to have the slope of that line accurate. So remember that chart hack I talked about earlier about forcing it to 0? That's what I'm using here. So you start to see how these different hacks build on each other and allow you to really make that complex chart much easier to create. Now, that's the data for the column chart, but what about the line? So for the line, it's down here. It's the CAGR line. So I've given it a name. The data series is going to be CAGR line. I have an X and a Y. Now, X and a Y, because a scatter plot has to have both X values and Y values. Now, you think of a traditional scatter plot, you have all the different values along the X and the Y. But with a column chart, what are the X values? I mean, the Y values, you know, are going to be the vertical axis there, but what are the X values? And here's where it's good to know that in a column chart, each column, the center of each column is on an individual number, and it's just incremented by 1. So the first column on the left is number 1, second column is number 2, number 3, and so on. So when I'm setting my values here for my X, my first point is going to be at 1, because that's going to be above the center of the first column, the leftmost column. And the last one's going to be 4. So because I have 4 columns here, it's going to be the last column. Now, obviously, I could make these formulas if I wanted to. If I needed to, I could do that, because maybe I have a different number of data points sometimes, and you can make this more complex, but I'm just trying to keep it simple for this example. Now, the Y values. The Y values, when we take a look at our formula here, we'll go up to our formula bar, B17 plus I7. So it is whatever the value is for that first point, and adding on, again, I7 is this line distance that we calculated that I wanted to be consistent above. So it puts it far enough above, again, so it gives me that room for the data labels above each of the columns. Now, how we build this is going to be in stages. So stage 1 is to build our column chart, and then we're going to stage 2, we're going to add on the scatter plot. And you'll see why, because the scatter plot requires different inputs, we have to build it in stages. Now, I've also done, and it's one of the things I wanted to show you here, is sort of a bonus tip, bonus hack, is to use a cell as the chart title. So this cell here, A27, I have set up using a formula to create the title that includes the calculation. So let me zoom in on the formula here for you, and we'll take a look. So I have put in the text, the standard text I want, CAGR over time period, colon, space. We always need the space. And then I've used the concatenation operator, which is that ampersand. And I've used the text function. The text function is a function in Excel that converts a number into formatted text. And you use pretty much the same sort of formatting you would use when you use number formatting. So I've said, take G6, which is that calculated CAGR value, and express it as a percentage with 1 decimal place. That is what gives me the text down here, CAGR over time period, colon space, 5.6%. Now I'm going to be able to use that as the chart title. So you start to see how these calculations give you flexibility and can change whenever you need to. So let's start. I'm going to create my column chart first, and this is the standard. I've selected both of those data series, insert my regular column chart we have here, and I'm going to do the formatting that I did before. So I'm going to make them overlap. The force 0 needs to overlap. So I'm going to select one of the columns, Control 1 opens my formatting task pane. And then in my series overlap again, I'm going to set the series overlap to 100%. And I'm going to set my gap width here to 50%. Just makes the chart look better. I can get rid of the legend. I can get rid of the grid lines. And then I'll go ahead and add some data labels outside end. So I have my data labels above the columns. So that looks all good. The chart title. So let's do that hack first. So the chart title, I can click into the chart title, but instead of entering text here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the formula bar. I'm going to click in the formula bar, and then I'm going to say equals, and then I'm going to select my cell that has that title in it. And you'll notice, let me zoom in so you can see what it did here. What it did is it gives me a full cell reference. So it has the worksheet name and the cell with the dollar signs, locks it in. It has to do that because it needs to be for sure on that particular cell. Now when I hit enter, you'll notice it creates the chart title from that cell. So if I change that cell in any way, either through a formula, the data changes, I want to change the text, the title in this chart automatically updates. So that's how we get the chart title from a cell. Now, how do we add this next data series on so that we can create the line? Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the chart, and then in my chart design ribbon, I'm going to go up to this button here called Select Data. I'm going to click on that, and it gives me the Select Data Source dialog box. And you'll notice it lists my series here on the left. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a data series. Okay, so I'm going to add a data series, and I'll click on the Add button. And what it does is it gives me the dialog box here. And the dialog box only has two requests. First of all, what's the series name? Where is the series name in the worksheet? And secondly, where are the values? But you say, but Dave, we need an X and a Y. Right. So Excel assumes that the new data series you're adding is the same chart type as the previous, the last data series in this chart. Well, that's a column, so it thinks it only needs a series name and values. We have to add it this way first, and then we will come back and change it. So this is why I said in stages. So where is the series name? Well, I can simply move on my worksheet, go over and select the series name is called CAGR line. So I click on that, and you'll notice it changes the value there. Okay. Now, the series values, what you want to do there is you want to backspace, get rid of everything there, and then go and select the Y value cells. Now, why the Y value cells? Because it's going to result in it being correct when we change it later on. Just makes it a whole lot easier. Now I can click OK. And click OK again. What did it do? Well, it placed those columns on top. Well, yeah, that's normally what it would do, but what I want to make sure is I want to make sure that it turns it into the scatter plot. So how do I change just this data series to be a different type of graph? Well, it's really quite easy. You simply just right-click on any of the columns, and we use this option here. I want to zoom in on it so you make sure you see it. It says Change Series Chart Type. This allows us to change the chart type of each individual series, not the whole chart, just each series. So when I click on that, what it does is it opens up the custom combination chart type. So it says, hey, okay, this is going to be custom one, so what would you like to do? And what it does down here in the bottom is it says each of the series you can choose what type of chart it is. So for my Kaggle line, I'm going to drop this down, and in the list it gives me, now it will not give you every single type of chart, and in fact some of them don't even work together, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to scroll down until I find the one that's the category XY scatter, and I'm going to select the one here that says scatter with straight lines. I don't want markers, I just want the lines. Because again, since I've defined only 2 points, it's only going to draw one line. Makes it simple that way. So I'm going to select that, and you'll notice it automatically changes it in the preview. Now I can select OK. But it's only going between the first 2 columns, Dave. How do we change that? Well, here's where, again, now that Excel knows it needs an X and a Y, we can go and tell it where the X values are. So again, I'll go back to my select data. I'll select my Kaggle line, and I'll click on Edit. And what I want you to see here is it's now asking us, okay, I know where the series name and the Y values are. Okay, where's the X values? Because it never asked us before because it didn't think it needed it. Now it knows it needs it. So I'll click in here, and I'll just highlight my 2 X values, click OK, and you'll notice that in the graph, it automatically updated. Now I have the Kaggle line where I want it to be. And the last thing I want to do to this is just add the arrowhead. Because this is a line, just like any other line, when I select it, I can go to the chart format ribbon, and in the shape outline, it allows me to select weight, dashes, and arrows. Now I don't want to change the weight. I think it's okay. I don't want it to be dashed, although you could change that if you want. But it does allow you to select the arrow. So if I want to give it direction, because again, it is from year 1 to year 4, so I want to indicate that direction with an arrow, I can select this arrow here, this style, and it adds that arrowhead. So now what I have on my chart is I have the title saying here's the Kaggle value, here is the direction from year 1 to year 4. So I've added that line onto the columns. I've added it for Kaggle. You can start to think about how might you use this in your own charts, the labeling that you need to add on for the charts that you're creating. Is it an arrow? Is it a line? It's one of the things I've also used this for is to add a goal or a standard line on a bar chart. So if you have bars and you want to say here's the goal and some have exceeded and some haven't met the goal, this is a great way that you can add that line onto a bar chart. With this scatter, because again, it's part of the chart, it updates automatically with the data. So for example, in year 4 here, if instead of 3015, let's say it was 3500. What it does is it calculates a new Kaggle. So you'll notice the Kaggle automatically updated because it calculated it. The title in this cell automatically updated. And the line, the slope of the line, automatically changes and repositions. This is what gives you that flexibility. I'll just hit Control-Z and you'll see it go back to what it was. This is what gives you the flexibility inside Excel to be able to add that line, whatever you want that line to do, whether you want to direct the audience's attention, whether you want to add additional information with that line, but it allows you to control it as the creator of the chart within Excel, all so that it updates automatically using a scatter with lines data series. I've done a full tutorial on this Kaggle line example that I showed you in the session, and I also mentioned in the session that you can use this same idea to add a goal or target line to a bar chart. And so this particular example here, I have an entire tutorial about how you do that. Again, I will link to both of these examples in the description down below. That's one of the hacks that I shared during my Excel Virtually Global conference session. To see all the hacks that I shared and all the additional information, use the link beside me
to open the playlist that has the videos for all 5 hacks. Thanks for watching.